Good morning and welcome to NiCHE Conversations. I am Jessica DeWitt, one of the editors here at the Network in Canadian History and Environment. And today I am lucky to be joined by Sabine LeBel. Can you tell us about yourself?
Good morning. Well, it's morning where I am.
It's
Good
morning here. It's earlier
morning.
morning here.
Um, my name is Sabine LeBel, and I work at UNB, University of New Brunswick in Fredericton. So I'm on the east coast of Canada, and a lot of my teaching and research is in queer ecologies.
Yes, yes, where we have I can't talk, cross paths before with a piece in our first Succession series back in 2020. Everyone look out for Succession 4 call for papers in January. Um, but so for this piece, which you wrote for the Nuala Comhanoch's Finding Humor in the Environmental History of the Climate Crisis, I believe was the name of the series. You wrote a piece called Capsize the Rich, Orca Memes and Anti-Capitalist Interspecies Solidarity, which is what we're going to be talking about today. Very excited, very popular piece. People love or anytime we publish anything on orcas, people eat it up. And we published something in Succession 3 last year on orcas, and that was very popular. And this one is very popular. Anyways, orcas, very popular since 2020, especially. Ooh, look at that transition. So I wonder if you could tell us about, the rise of orca memes since 2020 and how these memes employ humor.
Absolutely. So I became aware of these orca memes. I suspect how many other people did. So it was in the early days of COVID-19 when a lot of us were trying to navigate lockdowns.
Mm,
I think especially those of us in academia in Canada, many of us were in lockdown situations, maybe teaching virtually, maybe not.
yes.
And I think one of the things we saw happening is because human activity calmed down, there was this rise in memes that was all about like nature's healing because humans aren't messing things up essentially. And so I sort of see the orca memes as connected to that, but with more of an edge. So the orca memes started around this time, and there's a group of Iberian orcas in the Strait of Gibraltar, and they started ramming boats, but it wasn't just any boats. They really seemed to be focusing on luxury yachts. I don't
Mhm.
know enough about the anatomy of boats to know why they might have chosen those, but it was really delightful for humans because it really
Yes.
felt like the orcas were kind of pushing back against, the way that humanity has gotten into their space, into their habitat, into like places where they need to like live and play and hunt and everything. And I think that it pushed back also against some mainstream ideas that non-human animals, even the smart ones, are just dumb animals, that
Mm,
they don't have this sort of like motivation and sort of things that we associate with humanity. So I think there was something really delightful about orcas, not just pushing back against humanity, but in particular, they were pushing back against wealthy humans, the ones who
yes.
are the most responsible for the climate crisis. So I think there was a delight around
Mm.
ascribing these kinds of emotions or actions to the orcas.
Yeah. Yeah. I certainly have come across so many, well, endless hours on the internets, particularly before I had a baby. But um, yeah, so you're talking about this delight and, this like anthropocentric reaction to these memes, right? Or to these actions, I should say, that are being transformed into memes. And I wonder, we touch about it on your piece. I wonder if we could talk about today, like what is the tension between these memes and our scientific understanding of this behavior?
I think the thing that happens with memes is, and in particular these ones, I think before I get to the sciencey part, I think a lot of us are really dealing with intense eco-anxiety. I
Mm,
actually just
yes.
went to a workshop a few weeks ago where we were stitching moss and talking about eco-anxiety with artist Danielle Smith, and every single person in the room talked about really like having this experience and the sort of and not that this is a representative group, but the overwhelming kind of response that people were like, I'm so frustrated because people, like the people in charge aren't listening.
Hmm.
And so I think that's partly like, again, speaks to like humor can help us navigate those like really hard emotions, right? So I think
Yeah.
there's a really there's an emotional need there.
Hmm.
And I think that's partly why we end up circumventing the science. So the tension between the science. So one of the things I found really interesting when I was like looking at the sciencey science of this is that the sort of consensus amongst scientists is that they don't know why orcas are doing this. And that is, I would say, like the consensus across the board. There's a few theories, and they connect it to fads or playful behavior that orcas display. And so they connect it to a group of Pacific orcas
Hmm.
who used to wear salmon as hats. And it sort of
Yes.
happened twice. I feel like one time was in the 80s and one was more recently. And everyone's like, well, why are they doing this? And the scientists were like, we don't know. Like, what's the biological reason to put a salmon on your head if you're an orca? And so there's something as a human, or at least for some of us humans, like there's something really funny about that. And so that sort of like in terms of the rudders, most of the scientists are like, no,
Yeah.
like we don't know why they're doing it. But I think that once you get into like the relationships that these scientists have with the orcas, first of all, the name of the Iberian orca who is ramming the boats, who sort of seemed to be leading the behavior, is this matriarch called White Gladys. So the first of all, like as soon as the non-scientists are like, oh, well, there's a leader. She has a
Yes.
name. She's a matriarch. I think again, there's that tension of like our delight in that sort of anthropomorphizing, where the scientists are sort of like, whoa, like we're not totally sure what's going on here. I think the other thing that is particularly delightful about the orca stuff is that they are these beautiful social animals. And that when scientists are sort of pushed, they have to quote unquote admit things, which is something I talk about a little bit in my piece, which is like, well, it's not totally out of the range of possibility that orcas might perhaps be acting out of a place of revenge, right? So you end up getting these statements from scientists. That was one of my favorite ones. Another scientist said something along the lines of, well, it's not outside the realm of possibility from what we know of these like very beautiful social animals that they know that we're messing up the oceans, for example. So like they
Yeah.
know what we're doing. So I think that that adds to that tension that the memes really like they really take advantage of.
Yes. Yeah. Definitely this tension between also like I find it um hard to reconcile when you don't want to anthropomorphize too much, but also you want to recognize that we're animals too, and like we should be able to like have empathy and understand them in some way, like on some very concrete levels, we are the same, or we are like, experiencing similar things, right? So it's like this like tension between how much do we assume of them and how much do we let that be because like yeah, we're all, living on this earth, and to like claim that we can't understand them at all is to further separate humans from the environment, right? And I don't think that's
Exactly.
right. A good way to go either.
Exactly. And I think too, I think one of the things that I started to really think about when I was digging into the memes, is look a couple of things. One is this it feels like there's this longing like that's kind of at play with the memes, which is just like this need to be connected to these animals in some way, like to be in a relationship with them that you see through a lot of the memes. And so I think that's really interesting. And I feel like environmental psychologists could probably tell us a lot about what's going on with that. That's not my interest in particular. I think a lot of people feel maybe cut off from the oceans, cut off from like the ecosystem that they live in. I don't want to like generalize, but I think sometimes people do feel a bit like that. The other thing that I find really interesting is that it's not all different human cultures have different relationships and different understandings of their relationships with various non-human animals. And I think that the example of there was that orphaned calf, orca calf on the West Coast several years ago called Little Hunter. There was
Yes.
an indigenous community there that worked really hard to get her back, I think it was a her, back into the ocean to meet up with the rest of the pod. And when you like listen to what the chief and what different community members were saying, and they're working with scientists, so it was like a really like non-indigenous, indigenous kind of collaboration.
Mhm.
Um, the way that that community is talking is that the orcas there are part of their kinship, kind of it's part of their kin, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that that's the other thing with the memes is that they tend to like really flatten human relations with animals, except for that one orca meme that I found that was sort of speaking to differences between like a European or Eurocentric kind of way of interacting with animals versus maybe a more
Yes.
indigenous one. So I think that's where the complexity sometimes like the humor just flattens in a way that maybe it flattens too much. And it kind of like
Yes.
renders all humans and human desire and human behavior on the same level, which is of course not true at all.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think you've kind of touched upon it, but lastly, I just wanted to talk about like this interspecies solidarity piece. So kind of what we've been talking about will play into that, but what do these memes tell us about interspecies solidarity?
I think, like, I keep using the word delightful because I really find these memes delightful. Like, they bring me a lot of pleasure and a lot of joy. And I think that um, so I think like there's a sort of doom scrolling thing that can happen, and then the way that memes can function for some of us sometimes when we're in that doom scrolling, like, oh my gosh, if you're an environmentalist, you're like, ugh, I'm so frustrated, da da da.
Yeah.
I think the memes can kind of like break into that and just give like a release, a humor. And so like somatically speaking, that's a really good thing. But I think the sort of like desire and longing that I see in the memes, with the orca memes is this like we want to be in relation with non-human animals. And I find that really, really beautiful. It's like we want to be in solidarity with the earth and the creatures. And we want to mitigate climate change. And again, yes, it's simplistic, it's a joke, it's doing all of that kind of work, but I think there's something kind of deeper there. And then when I was looking, I was re-looking at the memes this morning, and the interspecies solidarity isn't just like, hey, humans want to join orcas
Yeah.
against billionaires, which is like part of it. But when you start to look at the memes, they're really funny because it'll be like, a science article that'll say something like, "Oh, this really strange thing. We saw dolphins and orcas, and there was a third animal, and I can't remember what it was, swimming together, somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean." And then the meme people jump in right away, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, like the orcas and the dolphins are joining forces against humans to fight climate change." And so I think there's this like, on the one hand, this very like Disney-esque happy vision of nature. But on the other hand, I think it speaks to like this deeper need and this deeper kind of like longing to sort of like make things better, at least ecologically. So I think
Yeah.
that's an interesting tension as well.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And one thing I do find really frustrating about climate change talk is that a lot of it doesn't talk about non more than humans. Like it doesn't talk about the impacts. We're talking about migrations and stuff. We're not talking about the species, who will not be able to migrate. And um, yeah, just the that undercurrent that doesn't always come to the forefront in popular climate change discourse. I find kind of refreshing. Yeah. Anyways, great topic.
Yeah.
Um, a lot to think about. Also, I've just been like noticing orca memes even more because you wrote about them, that sort of thing. I'm like, oh, there's another one, there's another one.
Yeah.
And yeah, just seeing the different ways that people approach it is very interesting. Meme culture. Maybe we should do a whole series on environmental memes.
You absolutely could and absolutely should because I think that they really break some of the like apathy and hopelessness. I know that
Yes,
people are like, oh, it's just armchair activism. Sure, absolutely. But I think there's also like it like having those little moments of joy and respite can be really valuable as well.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. Okay, well, thank you for joining me today, Sabine, and
Thank you.
navigating technical issues and being flexible. And it was great to chat with you and to meet you virtually on the internet because we've chatted via textual means, but we haven't chatted one-on-one before. So
It
that's
is
nice.
so lovely to chat with you this morning. I always love talking about orcas.
Wonderful. Thanks, Sabine. Take
Thank
care.
you. You too.